I refused to keep supporting my brother after he lost his job, so he convinced our parents I was trying to sabotage his marriage, and now my family wants nothing to do with me. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I have a younger brother named Chris who's 25. Our family dynamic has always been complicated, with Chris being the clear favorite of our parents, who are both 55. This favoritism started when we were kids and has only gotten more pronounced as we've grown up. When we were younger, Chris was always the one who got the most attention and praise. If we both did well in school, our parents would make a big fuss over Chris's achievements while barely acknowledging mine. When we played sports, they'd attend every single one of Chris's games but often missed mine due to scheduling conflicts. Even on our birthdays, Chris's parties were always bigger and more elaborate than mine. As we got older, the pattern continued. When I decided to go to college, my parents were supportive but made it clear that I'd have to figure out how to pay for it myself. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college to save up, and I took out student loans to cover what I couldn't afford. Meanwhile, when Chris decided to go to college, our parents offered to pay for everything: tuition, housing, even a new car to get around campus. Despite having everything handed to him, Chris ended up dropping out of college after 2 years. He said he wasn't feeling it and wanted to explore other options. Our parents were disappointed but quickly got over it, telling him that college isn't for everyone and that he'd find his path. They continued to support him financially while he figured things out. I, on the other hand, graduated with honors and immediately started looking for jobs in my field. I found a decent entry-level position at a marketing firm and started working on paying off my student loans. My parents congratulated me but didn't make much of a fuss about it. It was just expected that I'd do well. A few years passed, and Chris still hadn't found a stable job. He'd work for a few months at a time at various places, retail stores, restaurants, even a brief stint as a personal trainer, but nothing ever stuck. Our parents continued to cover most of his expenses, always ready with an excuse for why he just needed more time to find his calling. Then, when Chris was 23, he announced that he was getting married to his high school sweetheart, Claire. They'd been dating on and off since they were teenagers, and while I liked Claire, I was surprised they were ready to take such a big step. Chris had never shown much interest in commitment before, whether in relationships or in his career. My parents were thrilled. They immediately offered to pay for the entire wedding, no expense spared. They also gave Chris and Claire a substantial down payment for a house as a wedding gift, along with a brand new car. I was happy for my brother, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of resentment. I had been saving up for years to buy my own place, and here were my parents, once again, handing everything to Chris on a silver platter. The wedding was beautiful, and Claire seemed genuinely happy. I hoped that maybe this would be the turning point for Chris, that he'd finally start to take some responsibility and build a life with his new wife. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. About a year into their marriage, Chris lost his job at a local marketing firm. He'd only been there for 6 months, and from what I gathered, he'd been let go due to poor performance and frequent absences. Instead of immediately looking for a new job, Chris decided he needed to take some time off to figure out what he really wanted to do. Claire, who worked as a teacher's assistant, suddenly found herself working extra hours and picking up a second job at a coffee shop to make ends meet. My parents, of course, stepped in to help. They started covering Chris and Claire's mortgage payments and other bills, insisting it was only temporary until Chris found a new job. Weeks turned into months, and Chris still wasn't making any effort to find work. He spent most of his days playing video games or hanging out with friends while Claire worked herself to exhaustion. I started to notice Claire looking more and more stressed whenever I saw her. Dark circles under her eyes, losing weight, always seeming on edge. I tried talking to Chris about it a few times. I'd invite him out for coffee or a beer and casually bring up job opportunities I'd heard about. But he always had an excuse. The jobs weren't right for him, or he wasn't in the right headspace, or he was working on some big idea that would make him rich. It was frustrating to watch, especially knowing how hard Claire was working. As time went on, Claire and I started talking more. She'd call me sometimes when she needed to vent, and I'd listen as she poured out her frustrations. She told me how Chris would promise to look for jobs but never follow through, how he'd spend money they didn't have on new gaming equipment or nights out with friends, how he'd make her feel guilty for being unsupportive when she'd ask him to contribute more. I felt terrible for her. I knew what it was like to work hard while watching Chris coast by on our parents' generosity, but this was on another level. Claire was running herself into the ground trying to keep their life afloat while Chris seemed content to let her do all the work. I didn't tell Claire to leave Chris. That wasn't my place, and I knew it would only cause problems if Chris found out I'd said anything like that. But I did encourage her to talk to Chris about how she was feeling, to set some boundaries, and to take care of herself. I also started helping them out financially in small ways, buying groceries when I visited, quietly paying some of their utility bills, just to take some of the pressure off Claire. This went on for almost a year. Chris still wasn't working, my parents were still enabling him, and Claire was at her breaking point. That's when I decided I needed to do something more drastic. I told Chris that I couldn't keep helping them financially. I explained that I had my own bills to pay and that I couldn't keep covering for him. I thought maybe if he lost some of his safety nets, he'd finally be motivated to step up. Chris didn't take it well. He accused me of being selfish and unsupportive. He said I was jealous of him and Claire and that I was trying to sabotage their marriage. I was shocked by his reaction, but I stood my ground. I told him again that he needed to start taking responsibility for his life and his marriage, or he was going to lose everything. A few weeks later, everything blew up. Chris called our parents and told them that I had been trying to break up his marriage. He claimed that I had been poisoning Claire against him, telling her to leave him and making him look bad. It was a complete fabrication, but our parents believed every word of it. Suddenly, I was getting nonstop calls and messages from my parents. They were furious, accusing me of being jealous and spiteful. They said I was trying to ruin Chris's life because I resented how much they had supported him over the years. No matter how much I tried to explain my side of things, they wouldn't listen. In their eyes, Chris could do no wrong, and I was just the bitter, jealous sister trying to tear him down. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. My parents told me I needed to apologize to Chris and fix things with Claire, or I would no longer be welcome in the family. When I refused, they cut me off completely. They blocked my number, stopped responding to my messages, and told our extended family that I had betrayed Chris in the worst way possible. Even Claire stopped talking to me. Chris had apparently convinced her that I had only pretended to be her friend so I could manipulate her into leaving him. It was like my entire family had turned against me overnight, all because I had tried to help my brother take responsibility for his own life. Now, I'm left wondering how things got so out of hand. I've always been the responsible one, the one who worked hard and never asked for handouts. But somehow, in my family's eyes, I'm the villain in this story. I don't know how to begin fixing this situation, or if it's even possible to repair these relationships. All I know is that I'm tired of being the scapegoat for Chris's failures, and I'm not sure I want to keep trying to prove my innocence to people who are determined to see me as the bad guy. Update: when it's been about 2 weeks since my last post, and a lot has happened. I hadn't spoken to Chris, my parents, or Claire since the big blow-up, but last night I received an unexpected call from Claire that changed everything. When I saw Claire's name pop up on my phone, I was hesitant to answer. I thought she might be calling to yell at me or accuse me of something else. But when I picked up, I was surprised to hear her crying on the other end of the line. Claire started by apologizing profusely. She told me that she had finally learned the truth about what had been going on. Apparently, Chris had finally come clean to her about the financial situation. He admitted that I had been helping them with bills and groceries for months, and that the real reason I had stopped wasn't because I was trying to sabotage their marriage, but because I couldn't afford to keep supporting them. Claire was shocked and furious. She couldn't believe that Chris had lied to her for so long, making her think I was the one causing problems in their relationship when really, he was just angry that I had stopped paying their bills. She told me she felt horrible for cutting me off and believing Chris's lies. As we talked, Claire filled me in on what had been happening on her end. She said that things had only gotten worse after I stopped helping them financially. Chris still wasn't looking for work, and she was having to pick up even more hours to make ends meet. She was exhausted, stressed, and feeling completely alone. Claire also told me that she had started to notice other lies Chris had been telling. He'd claimed to be out job hunting when really he was hanging out with friends. He'd say he was working on a business plan, but she never saw any evidence of it. It was like once she started questioning one lie, she began to see all the others. I felt relieved that Claire finally knew the truth, but I also felt angry on her behalf. I couldn't believe Chris had manipulated her like that, using me as a scapegoat for his own failures. I told Claire that I never wanted to come between them, that I had only ever tried to be supportive of their relationship while encouraging Chris to step up. We talked for hours, with Claire alternating between crying and expressing her anger at the situation. By the end of the call, she told me she had made a decision. She said she couldn't continue living like this, constantly stressed and lied to. She was going to tell Chris she wanted to separate, and she asked if I would support her through it. Of course, I said yes. The next day, Claire moved out of their house and in with her sister. She said she needed space to think about what she wanted and to decide if there was any way to salvage her marriage. Chris, predictably, didn't take it well. He called me, yelling and cursing, accusing me of turning Claire against him. I tried to stay calm and tell him that this was the result of his own actions, but he wouldn't listen. What's even more frustrating is that my parents are still completely on Chris's side. I don't know exactly what he's told them, but they seem to believe that Claire is overreacting and that I'm still somehow the root of all the problems. They've been calling and texting Claire nonstop, trying to convince her to go back to Chris and work things out. I've tried reaching out to my parents to explain my side of things again, but they won't hear it. They're so convinced that Chris is this perfect son who just needs a little more support that they can't see how their enabling has contributed to this whole mess. It's like they're living in an alternate reality where Chris can do no wrong and I'm always the bad guy. At this point, I'm not sure what to do. I'm glad that Claire and I are back on speaking terms, and I want to be there for her as she figures out her next steps. But it's incredibly painful to know that my own family is willing to believe the worst about me to protect Chris. I don't know if there's any way to make them see the truth, or if it's even worth trying anymore. For now, I'm focusing on being there for Claire and taking care of myself. This whole situation has been incredibly stressful, and I'm trying to remind myself that I'm not responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. I can only control my own actions and be true to myself. I hope that eventually, the truth will come out and my family will see things clearly. But if they don't, I might have to accept that and move forward without them. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and things have taken a dramatic turn. Claire has officially filed for divorce from Chris. She didn't tell him she was planning to do it, she waited until she had moved most of her things out of their house and had secured a small apartment for herself. Then she had the divorce papers served to Chris at home. When Chris found out, he completely lost it. He called me, screaming at the top of his lungs, saying that this was all my fault. He kept yelling that if I hadn't gotten into Claire's head and poisoned her against him, she never would have left. He accused me of being jealous of their relationship and said I had always wanted to break them up. I tried to stay calm, but I'll admit, I lost my temper a bit. I told Chris that he needed to stop blaming everyone else for his problems and take a good, hard look at himself. I pointed out that he had spent over a year doing absolutely nothing, letting Claire work herself to the bone while he sat around playing video games and hanging out with friends. I asked him how he could possibly be shocked that Claire doesn't want to be with him anymore when he's shown her so clearly that he doesn't respect her or their marriage. Chris, of course, didn't want to hear any of this. He hung up on me mid-sentence and then blocked my number. He also blocked me on all social media platforms. I figured that would be the end of it, at least for a while, but I was wrong. What I didn't expect was my parents' reaction. About 2 days after Chris blocked me, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was shocked to see them standing there. We hadn't spoken in months, and the last time we did, they had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with me. As soon as I opened the door, they started in on me. My mom was crying, saying that I had torn the family apart and ruined Chris's life. My dad was red in the face with anger, telling me I was selfish for not helping Chris when he needed me most. They demanded to know why I had ruined Chris's marriage and insisted that I needed to fix things. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked them if they even cared about what Chris had done, about how he had lied to Claire for months, manipulated her, and refused to take any responsibility for his life or his marriage. I pointed out that Chris was nearly 26 years old and had never held down a job for more than a few months, that he had let his wife work 2 jobs while he did nothing, that he had lied to everyone about what was really going on. But they didn't want to hear it. In their minds, Chris was still their perfect little boy who could do no wrong. They insisted that he just needed more time to figure things out, that Claire was being impatient, and that I had somehow orchestrated this whole situation out of jealousy. I told them that I was done. I was done being the scapegoat for Chris's failures, done being blamed for problems I didn't cause, and done trying to make them see the truth when they so clearly didn't want to. I told them that unless they were willing to look at the situation objectively and acknowledge Chris's part in all of this, I didn't want to hear from them anymore. They left angry, with my mom in tears and my dad telling me I would regret pushing the family away. But honestly, I felt relieved. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For years, I had been trying to live up to impossible standards, always being compared to Chris and found wanting, no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved. Now, I was finally free of that burden. I've spoken to Claire a few times since she filed for divorce. She's struggling. It's not easy to end a relationship that's been a part of your life for so long, but she says she feels like she can breathe for the first time in years. She's focusing on her work and starting to rediscover who she is outside of her relationship with Chris. As for me, I'm trying to move forward. It's not easy knowing that my family has essentially disowned me, but I'm working on accepting that I can't control their perceptions or actions. All I can do is live my life with integrity and surround myself with people who value me for who I am. Update 3. It's been about 3 months since everything went down with Chris, Claire, and my parents. A lot has changed, and I wanted to give one final update on the situation. First and foremost, I haven't spoken to my parents or Chris since that day they showed up at my apartment. I've made the decision to go no contact with them, at least for the foreseeable future. It wasn't an easy choice, but after a lot of thought and some sessions with a therapist, I realized it was the healthiest option for me. The constant drama and emotional manipulation were taking a huge toll on my mental health. I was always anxious, waiting for the next accusation or blow-up. I found myself second-guessing every interaction I had with them, wondering how it would be twisted or used against me later. Here's the completion of the post. It wasn't a healthy way to live, and I knew something had to change. So, I made the difficult decision to step away from my family relationships for now. I've blocked their numbers and social media accounts, and I've asked my friends not to pass along any messages from them. As for Claire, we still talk occasionally. She's doing well, all things considered. The divorce is moving forward, and she's been focused on rebuilding her life. She's cut back on her work hours now that she doesn't have to support Chris, and she's even started taking some classes at the local community college. She told me she's rediscovering who she is outside of her relationship with Chris, and while it's scary, it's also exciting. Chris, from what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, isn't doing so great. Apparently, he's still not working and has moved back in with our parents. They're still supporting him financially and emotionally, convinced that he's the victim in all of this. Part of me feels sad for him. I know he's capable of so much more, but I've realized I can't force him to change. He has to want it for himself. As for me, I've been focusing on my own life and personal growth. I've thrown myself into my work, and I recently got a promotion at my job. I've also started volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring kids who come from difficult family situations. It's been incredibly rewarding, and it's helped me process a lot of my own experiences. I've made peace with the fact that my family may never see the truth of the situation. They've spent so long seeing Chris as the golden child and me as the troublemaker that I don't think they're capable of changing their perspective. It hurts, but I'm learning to be okay with it. I can't keep putting myself through the emotional roller coaster of trying to prove my innocence or worth to people who aren't willing to see it. Some days are harder than others. There are times when I miss the idea of family, holiday gatherings, shared inside jokes, having people who've known you your whole life. But then I remember the reality of what those relationships had become, and I know I've made the right choice for my own well-being. I'm slowly building my own support system. I've reconnected with old friends and made some new ones. I've even started dating someone who's kind, supportive, and drama-free. It's a nice change of pace. Looking back on everything that's happened, I can see how dysfunctional our family dynamic was for years. The favoritism, the enabling, the scapegoating, it wasn't healthy for any of us. While I wish things could have worked out differently, I'm grateful for the clarity this situation has given me. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday, my parents and Chris will realize the harm their actions have caused and want to make amends. If that day comes, I'll be open to having a conversation. But I'm not waiting for it or expecting it. I'm moving forward with my life, focusing on the relationships and pursuits that bring positivity and growth. For anyone out there dealing with similar family issues, I want you to know that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to prioritize your own mental health and well-being. And it's okay to walk away from toxic relationships, even if they're with family. It's not easy, but sometimes it's necessary. Thank you to everyone who's followed this story and offered support along the way. Your kind words and advice have meant more than you know. I'm signing off now, ready to start the next chapter of my life, one that I get to write on my own terms.